If you ask your parents or your grandparents to share with you anecdotes of their childhood, you'll find how their childhood was so different from yours. They did not have access to technologies. They did not have phones, laptops, tablets. They did not have social media like Facebook and WhatsApp that you can use today. This notion of progress and development that we bask in today will not remain the same for a long time. This is because what we consider as modern today will become outdated over a period of time. That is to say, these various technological changes are always in a process of evolution. These change, these develop, these evolve. Now, if you think of it this way, that if the childhood of your parents and grandparents were so different from yours, can you imagine how different life must have been thousands of years ago? Because just one generation ago, life was so different. And if we have to consider the period between 700 and 1750 CE, you will understand that a huge number of changes took place on different fronts, be that on the social, economic, political, cultural, or on the technological fronts. Now, our previous lesson was devoted to understanding the changes and the evolution that occurred to religions. And in this lesson, we will now focus on the different kinds of technological changes that were introduced to the Indian subcontinent between 700 and 1750 CE, and how these in turn also played a major role in changing the socio-economic political landscape of the subcontinent. So, let us now imagine ourselves as time travelers and go 1000 years back in time. The period that we have been focusing in our lessons is between 700 and 1750 CE. Now, this was a period of changes on different fronts, be that on the economic, cultural and socio-political fronts. Now, how did these changes suddenly happen in the subcontinent? Now, changes cannot happen overnight. These always involve a process. That is to say, these take time and gradually happen over a period of time. Now, we need to understand what was happening in the subcontinent around the 7th century. During this time, invaders, merchants, traders from West Asia were making their entry into the subcontinent. And with that, they brought with themselves new ideas, new perspectives. And these new ideas introduced the subcontinent to different kinds of technologies. And in this regard, mention must be made of the Persian wheel in the field of irrigation, the spinning wheel in the field of weaving, and firearms that were used for warfare. So, these are some of the things that have been introduced to the Indian subcontinent by the people who came from Central Asia. And with the growth of better technologies, the societies, the communities also evolved, because they now had access to different things that made their lives easier. They now had new ideas to implement. Now, the history of the origin of the Persian wheel is also contested. This is because different historians hold different opinions. Some historians trace its introduction to the early days of the Delhi Sultanate, while other historians are of the opinion that Babur's entry in the Indian subcontinent marked the entry of the Persian wheel in the subcontinent itself. So, these are two opinions that we find when we trace the history of the Persian wheel. We can find mentions of the Persian wheel in Baburnama, which is the biography of the Mughal Emperor Babur. Now, we learned that these people from West Asia brought new changes on the technological front to the Indian subcontinent. Along with changes on the technological front, they also introduced the people of the subcontinent to new food and beverages. And while we talk about the new food and beverages that were introduced in the subcontinent around this time, mention must be made of potatoes, corn, chilies, tea, and coffee. So, these food items and beverages were introduced to the masses of the subcontinent around this time, and needless to mention, these items still continue to enjoy great popularity in India. Now, with more people coming in, food was required to feed the growing population. Now, how could the people who were living then grow more crops in the same region? It was not possible for them. And to this end, they now started clearing the forests for the pursuit of agricultural activities, because more crops were required to feed the growing population. But people back then did not always have proper houses and settlements to live in. In today's world, we have houses and apartments and bungalows to live in. But during this time, many forest dwellers and tribal communities used to live in the forests. And when these forests were being cleared for the pursuit of agricultural activities, these people were met with a challenge. Because these people did not want to leave their habitat even after being compelled to do so. Because if someone asks you to vacate your house overnight, will you be willing to do so? Most definitely not, because that is the place where you live in and you'll not be willing to leave your house. Similarly, the forest dwellers were not at all inclined to leave their habitat. But do you think all of them were finally forced and persuaded to leave the forests? Even after being compelled to do so, many forest dwellers and tribal communities did not leave their habitats. They continued to live in the forests. And while they lived in the forests, they had to do something to feed themselves. What did they do? They started tilling their lands. And in the process, they now became peasants. So, from forest dwellers, these people now became peasants and they were tilling their lands to feed themselves. Now, after these forest dwellers became peasants, they were under the influence of regional markets, chieftains, priests, monasteries, temples, and they were brought into the mainstream societies. For this, you have to keep in mind that the forest dwellers and the tribal communities lived outside the mainstream societies. They lived on the fringes of the mainstream societies. But in the process of becoming peasants, they were now incorporated into the mainstream societies. Let us now find out more about this, as in how their incorporation into the mainstream societies changed their lives over time. In the process of tilling their lands and becoming peasants, these people now became a part of large complex societies. Because earlier on, they used to live life on their own terms. They were not under the control or under the domination of mainstream societies. But being peasants, they were now a part of those societies. And since they were tilling their lands, they were growing crops, they invariably had to pay revenue to the landlords. So in this way, you can understand how these people, from being simple forest dwellers, were brought under the cover or under the umbrella of the large and complex societies. Now we learned that the forest dwellers were becoming peasants. They were having to pay taxes and revenue to the landlords. Now the societies as a whole were evolving because of this. That is to say, the socio-cultural landscape was changing. And with this now came into being several jatis or subcastes. Now let us try to understand what this jati system means. Firstly, we have to keep in mind that these jatis were grouped in terms of their occupations. Now the Varna system divides the societies into 4 coherent categories, that is the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and the Shudra. Now with more and more people joining the large and complex societies, several subcastes now came into being. Let me give you an example so that you can understand in greater clarity. Here you have the Shudra, which is the last caste in the caste hierarchy. Now, manual laborers, peasants, people doing menial tasks and various other groups of people together constitute the Shudra. So, the Shudra is one caste and that is divided into several subcastes. These people who belong to these jatis are based or categorized in terms of their occupation. So, the manual laborers did work which is different from what the peasants did. Now, if we see in terms of the Vaishya caste, we have the artisans, tradesmen, farmers, merchants, all making up this one caste. So, all these are separate jatis. These are separate subcastes that together make up a caste. The point that we are trying to establish here is that there are only 4 castes, but there can be multiple subcastes within these 4 castes. Now the Varna system is founded on the principle of occupation, because the Varna system categorizes people in terms of their occupation. Now when we come to the Jati system, we have to factor in another point. Along with segregating or categorizing people in terms of their occupations, the Jati system also takes into account the birth or lineage of these people. Now, along with this caste system that categorized the society into 4 castes, there were the outcasts and the untouchables who did not belong to the caste system. Since these people did work that did not get proper social recognition, these people were not considered a part of the caste system. From this, what we have to keep in mind is that with the coming in of more and more people into the large societies, now subcastes or jatis came into being. When we talk about jatis, we have to remember that these ranks changed at different regions and over different time periods. Now allow me to give you an example. Here we saw that the peasants belonged to the Shudra caste. Now over time, a peasant can become a merchant and that person will now become a part of the Vaishya caste. So this means that there was social mobility among the jatis. On account of hard work or on account of gaining more property and wealth, these people could rise up the social ladder. These people could rise up the ranks. Now, do you think these jatis were autonomous units? Most definitely not, because the conduct of the members of these jatis was managed by the rules and regulations that were framed by the jati itself. So these jatis were in charge of laying down the rules and regulations that people who belonged to that same jati were supposed to conform to. Now, who do you think enforced these rules and practices? In today's world, we have the judiciary system that lays down rules and various regulations that we are supposed to follow. Similarly, in these jatis, the Jati Panchayat, which was an assembly of elders, laid down these different rules and regulations that all the jati members were supposed to abide by. Now these jatis or subcastes were not autonomous units as we just discussed, which is why they were also under the control of the chieftain. The chieftains were people who governed the villages, and these jati members were also subject to the rules and the practices that were laid down by these chieftains. and together these jatis constituted only a small unit of a state. This is because these jatis were formed by more and more people who were coming into the societies. Now these people obviously were not numerically predominant, which is why these people constituted only a small unit of the larger state. What we have been discussing all this while contributed to the emergence of socially and economically diverse societies, because different people were pursuing different professions, and this led to divergence or differences among the people who lived within the same society. Now the traditional caste system classified and segregated society in terms of the occupations of the people. Now we learned that the caste system divided the society into 4 castes, that is the Brahmana, the Kshatriya, the Vaishya and the Shudra. Now these people were ranked in accordance with the professions they pursued. At the apex of everything, that is at the apex of this caste system, came the Brahmanas. Now the Brahmanas were the learned men, the scholars. And needless to mention, these people exercised their power, their authority, their dominance over members who belonged to the other castes. Just below the Brahmanas came the Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas were the warriors and the ruling caste. Now, these Kshatriyas also gained great importance in the Indian subcontinent around this time. That is, around the 7th century, these Kshatriyas were gaining prominence. Let us find out more about how these Kshatriyas were becoming both numerically and politically dominant in the subcontinent. Around this time, many warrior communities came into being. Now these warrior communities were characterized by their heroism, their bravery, their courage, their gumption. Now when we talk about these warrior communities, mention must be made of the Rajputs. The Rajputs were a very important warrior community who ruled over Rajputana. So the region they ruled came to be known as Rajputana, and it spanned across the present day Indian states of Rajasthan and parts of Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat. Now this brings us to a very important question. From where does the word Rajput come? The word Rajput is derived from the Sanskrit word Rajputra, which means the son of a king or a prince. So can you understand how the very name that signified this warrior community referred to kings and princes? In today's independent India, rulers and kings most definitely do not exist, but if we have to talk about the Rajputs, they are associated with bravery and their sense of loyalty. The Rajputs can be considered one of the most powerful warrior communities that came into being around this time. Now let me tell you a very interesting fact about these Rajputs. Now there remains a very important point to be discussed about the Rajputs. Let us now find that out. But before proceeding with this lesson and finding out about that important point on the Rajputs, let me ask you a question. From which Sanskrit word was the term Rajput derived? Was it derived from Rajputra, Rajputri, Rajputana or Raja? Well, the correct answer is Rajputra. The Sanskrit word Rajputra means the son of a king or prince, and it is from this word that the word Rajput has been derived. Now you must be wondering that these Rajputs were Kshatriyas. We know that the Kshatriyas were the warrior caste. The Kshatriyas comprised the ruling families. But let me tell you a very interesting point about this. The Rajputs were not Kshatriyas, and in fact they were initially tribals. So can you imagine how from being tribals, these Rajputs entered the mainstream society and went on to establishing their powerful kingdom. Now these Rajputs claimed the status of a Kshatriya between the 8th and the 14th centuries. These Rajputs actually comprised soldiers and commanders who served in the armies of different kings. So along with founding their own empires and kingdoms in different parts, these Rajputs also served in the armies of different kings. Now this was a time when warrior communities were gaining prominence and importance in the subcontinent. Firstly, we talked about the Rajputs and how they claimed the status of a Kshatriya between the 8th and the 14th centuries and then went on to establishing themselves as a powerful ruling community. With that in mind, we should also mention the Maratha, Sikh, Jat, Ahom and the Kayastha, who also became politically important around this time in the Indian subcontinent. This now brings us to an end of our lesson on technological changes and how those affected the social, political and economical changes. Here we learned how the merchants, traders and invaders from Central Asia brought with themselves many new ideas, and when they implemented these new ideas in the Indian subcontinent, the subcontinent now saw the rise of different technological things. Now when we talk about technological things, we do not refer to the technology that you and I use today. Technology was very different at that point of time. Now with the influx of new ideas and people as well, the socio-political landscape also underwent changes. Forests were being cleared for the pursuit of agriculture, but many people who lived as forest dwellers started tilling their lands and became peasants. They in turn became parts of the larger societies. This now gave birth to the jatis or subcastes within the traditional Varna system, and this is a point that we have discussed at great length. From there, we also talked about how different warrior communities gained importance in the subcontinent around this time. In a subsequent lesson, we will now focus on how terminologies, how languages also evolve over different periods of time. What we have been trying to do in this series of lessons is that we are trying to understand that nothing is static. Everything that pertains to the societies and communities is subject to changes, be that religion, be that the socio-political landscapes, be that the technological things. In a subsequent lesson, we will now focus on the linguistic aspect of these changes. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.